Imagine a nation where the ground beneath your feet is as uncertain as the weather above. Welcome to Bangladesh, a country uniquely challenged by the forces of nature. Nestled at the convergence of several mighty rivers and the Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh is one of the most densely populated countries on Earth, with over 160 million people living in an area smaller than the state of Iowa. This geographical positioning makes Bangladesh highly susceptible to natural disasters, particularly cyclones and floods. Each year the land is battered by up to half a dozen cyclones, each bringing devastating winds and heavy rains that lead to severe flooding. The rivers, lifeblood of the nation, also pose a threat as they swell and erode their banks, often swallowing homes and farmland in the process. As the waters rise, so do the stakes in the fight against climate change. This relentless cycle of destruction is not just a tale of natural calamities but a stark illustration of the disproportionate impact of global environmental issues on less economically developed countries. This is Bangladesh, a front line in the battle against climate change. While India faces its own set of challenges, the scale in Bangladesh is starkly different. Both nations grapple with the wrath of climate change, but the plight of Bangladesh is particularly severe, making its story not just one of tragedy, but of relentless assault by nature. Let's delve into the environmental catastrophes both countries face. Flooding and cyclones are common threads in their tapestry of climate challenges, yet it's the frequency and ferocity with which these disasters strike Bangladesh that sets it apart. Nestled at the confluence of the Himalayan runoff and the Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh's low-lying topography makes it extraordinarily vulnerable to riverine and coastal flooding. In contrast, while India also suffers from significant flooding, its diverse topography from north to south provides some buffer against the uniform impact seen in Bangladesh. Moreover, cyclones batter the coastlines of both nations. However, Bangladesh's geographical positioning makes it a hotspot for some of the most devastating cyclones recorded in recent history. The intensity and destruction wrought by these cyclones are compounded by the country's high population density and lack of robust infrastructure, which are not as acute in the larger and somewhat more resource-equipped India. This disparity is not just a matter of geography but also of capacity to adapt and mitigate. India, with its larger economy, has more resources to dedicate to climate resilience. It's developing more robust flood defenses, early warning systems, and urban planning reforms. Bangladesh, with fewer resources and a higher rate of poverty, struggles to implement similar measures on an adequate scale. The human cost is staggering in both countries, yet the scale of displacement and disruption in Bangladesh is disproportionate. It's a relentless cycle of recovery and devastation with little respite for the affected populations. In this comparison, the scales tip unfavorably towards Bangladesh, revealing a harsher reality. The challenges are monumental, and the need for international cooperation and support is more urgent than ever. It's not just about the land, it's about the lives that are intertwined with it. In Bangladesh, the relentless assault of climate change is not merely a tale of rising sea levels and devastating cyclones. It's a saga of socio-economic upheaval where environmental degradation catalyzes poverty and forces thousands from rural heartlands to congested urban areas. Picture the lives of farmers, fishers, and small-town residents, whose daily bread is earned from the very environment that is now turning hostile. As fields flood and riverbanks erode, the economic backbone of many communities is breaking. Agriculture, a critical sector in Bangladesh, is intermittently wiped out by saline intrusions in the water and unpredictable monsoon patterns. This not only slashes food production but also decimates local economies, leading to a vicious cycle of poverty. People who once lived self-sufficiently are now migrating in droves to cities like Dhaka, seeking any work that will pay, thus swelling the ranks of the urban poor and straining already meager resources. Contrast this with India, a nation that, while also severely affected by climate change, has a larger economic scale and somewhat better infrastructure to cushion some of the blows. India's diverse economy and more robust disaster response mechanisms provide a slightly thicker safety net against similar environmental challenges. While far from perfect, these systems offer a degree of resilience that is less common across the border in Bangladesh. The migration from rural areas in Bangladesh to overcrowded cities is not just a shift in population. It's a shift in the entire socio-economic fabric of the country. Urban areas, unprepared for such an influx, see skyrocketing demand for housing, water, and sanitation services, which in turn leads to increased pollution and further environmental degradation. It's a relentless cycle, where the initial environmental problems are magnified by their own consequences. Every flooded field and eroded riverbank in Bangladesh cascades into deeper socio-economic crises. The stories of those who face these adversities tell the true tale. In the heart of Bangladesh, where the rivers swell beyond their brims and the monsoons show no mercy, the stories of the local people paint a vivid picture of resilience and despair. Imagine the life of Anika, a mother of 3 who each year rebuilds her home with whatever material she can salvage, only to see it washed away again with the next flood. Her story is not just about loss, it's about the unyielding spirit to start over under skies that offer no reprieve. Then there's Rahim, a fisherman whose livelihood depends on the capricious waves of the Bay of Bengal. Last year, a cyclone swept away his boat, his sole means of income. With no government aid or insurance, Rahim's family now teeters on the edge of extreme poverty. He represents the thousands who are repeatedly struck by natural disasters, with little to no safety net to catch them. These personal tales are underscored by a lack of substantial international support. Despite the global acknowledgement of their disproportionate suffering due to climate change, the aid trickles in slowly, often entangled in bureaucratic red tape. Meanwhile, the local communities, armed with nothing but their collective will, innovate their own survival strategies. They build floating schools and hospitals, adapting to a life that is dictated by water. However, the resilience of the Bangladeshi people is stretched thin. The continuous cycle of rebuilding and relocating consumes resources, both emotional and material, that should have been directed towards progress and development. The international community's response remains critically inadequate, often failing to meet the urgent needs of those affected by these relentless environmental catastrophes. Their voices, though often drowned out by the roar of the raging weather, carry a plea for attention and aid. As the waters rise, so too must our global response. In the intricate web of global climate dynamics, nations like Bangladesh find themselves in a perilous position. Despite contributing minimal amounts to the world's carbon emissions, they are on the front lines of climate catastrophe. This is not merely a question of environmental justice, it's a stark reality of survival. As seas encroach on land and cyclones batter coastlines, the plight of Bangladesh calls for more than sympathy. It demands action. The international community holds a profound responsibility. It is not enough to acknowledge the hardship, it is imperative to act. Developed nations, historically responsible for a lion's share of emissions, must lead this charge. They can provide crucial support through funding, which can be directed towards strengthening infrastructure, improving disaster response, and bolstering the local economies that are hit hardest by climate impacts. Moreover, technology transfer is essential. Sharing advanced technologies can help countries like Bangladesh not only to mitigate their own emissions, but adapt to the harsh new realities of a warming world. From flood-resistant crops to advanced weather forecasting systems, the tools exist. The will to share them must follow. Policy support also plays a critical role. International policies that integrate climate resilience and adaptation into trade, aid, and diplomacy are long overdue. By weaving these threads into the fabric of international relations, we can ensure that nations facing the worst effects of climate change are not left to fend for themselves. To those who argue the cost of such endeavors, consider the cost of inaction. As we delay, the waters do not. They rise, claiming homes, livelihoods, and lives. The cost of rebuilding and relief far outstrips the investment in prevention and preparedness. It is not merely an economic calculation, but a moral imperative. Bangladesh is sending out an SOS, and it is time for the world to respond. In the grand narrative of climate change, some chapters are more grievous than others. Throughout this discussion, we've seen how Bangladesh, despite its smaller global footprint, faces a disproportionate brunt of climate-related disasters compared to its larger neighbor India. Coastal flooding, devastating cyclones, and extreme heat waves are not just statistics, but everyday realities that threaten millions of lives in Bangladesh. While India too suffers immensely, the scale and frequency of these events in Bangladesh underscore a critical vulnerability. The plight of Bangladesh offers a stark reminder of the inequities embedded within the climate crisis, where those least responsible for carbon emissions bear the heaviest consequences. This isn't just a regional issue, it's a global moral imperative. The stories of disrupted lives and communities in Bangladesh call for an urgent, unified response. It's not merely about aid or sympathy, it's about justice and the collective responsibility of the international community to act decisively. For Bangladesh, the perils are profound and the clock is ticking. It's time to turn empathy into action.